Australia, a beautiful nation full of beautiful people, known for its golden sands, lovable larrikins, our fondness for binge drinking, and our penchant for suing YouTubers for defamation. Australia really is the lucky country, but one area where you might say it's not so lucky is when it comes to our representation in video games. Clearly speaking with no bias whatsoever, I reckon Australia deserves more representation in all forms of media, especially video games, to help quash all of the bullshit American stereotypes of what we're like, so the world can see us for the multicultural yet casually racist people that we truly are. So don't put a fucking shrimp on the barbie, go down to your local servo for a pack of darts, go down to the bottle-o for a carton of piss and put on some fucking akadaka. Because it's time to have a yarn about Australia in video games. Now, it wouldn't be fair dinkum to say that Australia gets no representation in video games at all, because when you look around, there's a fair few of us that have snuck our way into well-known franchises. You got Kano from Mortal Kombat, Miranda Lawson from Mass Effect, Chips Dubbo from Halo, you got Dash Dingo, Roger from Tekken who is just a straight up kangaroo, and Junkrat and Roadhog from Overwatch, even though Roadhog has a fucking American accent for some stupid ass reason. But when video game developers think of a location to set their games in, I think it's safe to say that Australia is probably an afterthought. How often are games that take place in real world countries set in America, or America, or America? And I know what you're thinking, but Davo, there's plenty of games set in Australia. What about Ty the Tasmanian Tiger? No, you can't trick me, mate. I know Tasmania isn't real. But that's not to say that there are no video games set here. Forza Horizon 3 is set in the bastardized Australian map. Games like Rainbow Six Siege and Overwatch have maps set in Australia too, and who could forget the adventures of Down Under Dan, the MS-DOS point-and-click adventure. The thing is that being set in Australia really has little to no effect on a lot of these games other than providing a setting. It's almost as if we're just a fancy backdrop and a way for games to say, hey look, Australian Outback map, look how original we're being. I'd like to see more games that actually have a proper narrative set in Australia, or at least maps that provide more than just a change of scenery. I mean, can you imagine a Grand Theft Auto set in Australia?
Trying to tell me I done a fucking Toyota Camry instead of a Commodore, you fucking dog.
Oh my god, brother, stop bashing me, you fucking racist.
Yeah, well, maybe you should just go back to where you fucking came from, cause we're fucking full.
Grand Theft Auto, Western Sydney.
But one part of video game narratives that is never explored is what happens to Australia when the whole world goes to shit. What happened to Australia in Fallout? What happened to Australia in Half-Life? I reckon the Combine probably just left Australia alone. Probably saw a huntsman spider the size of a dinner plate and thought, nah, fuck that, and just left us to it. Joke's on them though, huntsman spiders aren't even deadly, they're just big and cuddly, especially when they drop off the ceiling to say hello to you. The only game where we really know what happened to Australia is in Overwatch, but nobody cares because that game is just a shitty TF2 ripoff made by even shittier people. And before you tell me, well what about Mad Max? That's a post-apocalyptic game too. Well, you've obviously never been to Mount Isa before. That's just how it works out there. Though one place that Australia has been put on the map is, funnily enough, in map games. Australia was lucky enough to get its own focus tree in the first DLC expansion for Hearts of Iron 4, making it slightly more interesting to play than a country like El Salvador. There's been a little bit of an Australia boom in the strategy genre over the last few years. We finally got into the Civilisation series after being added to Civ 6, and although John Curtin I'm sure was an alright bloke, how could you not make the leader Bob Hawke, the Prime Minister / Aussie folklore legend, who set the world record for sculling a beer? And we're also in the newly released Civ clone Humankind as a contemporary civilization for some ungodly reason. Not sure why a country as historically insignificant as us is in there, but hey, they also let Brazil in, so I guess they let any irrelevant country be playable. But how can we talk about Australia in video games without touching on the most Australian pastime there is? Sport. And the most Australian of them all, cricket. Now, the problem with cricket video games is that they're all fucking terrible. Have you ever played Wii Cricket? With a fucking Wiimote cricket bat? I didn't think you did. Except for Ricky Ponting International Cricket 2005. That shit was fire. Now, some people might say that the Aussie rules football is the most Australian sport out there, and to those people I would say AFL? Pfft, More like GayFL. Oh wait, no, please no. But the greatest game of all is Rugby League, and the greatest video game of all is Rugby League Live 4. Look at the graphics on Paul Gallen's face there. He's almost as ugly as he is in real life. Unfortunately for us, the more popular sports games are about the ones that Australia isn't particularly good at. But those games were made by EA, so playing them is morally wrong anyway. The issue that I have with a lot of the Australian characters in video games is that they're all pretty much the same kind of trope, that lovable larrikin or hard bushman that Crocodile Dundee has doomed Australia to be forever remembered for in American media. And the issue isn't with the stereotype itself. I can certainly get behind a well-written Aussie ochre, but so many video game studios fail to even get it right. You'd think hiring an Australian to do the voice acting would be a good start, wouldn't you, Jeff? Take Fuse from Apex Legends. Firstly, sick mo, respect the mullet. But while this man looks like a fair dinkum full-grown Aussie that has a VB long neck at 20 to 8 in the fucking morning for brekkie, he sounds more like a hipster barista from Melbourne who desperately wishes he was a bogan.
Don't get your budgie smugglers in a twist. It's just your old mate Fuse.
It's just your old mate Fuse. Shut the fuck up. However, there's one game that does it better than all others. Team Fortress 2. But if you think I'm talking about the sniper, then you're a fucking drongo, because if you read the comics that we're still waiting for a sequel to like 10 billion years later, then you'd know that he's actually from New Zealand. Now this is an Australian man. No shirt, wrestles animals, owns $1 billion corporation that makes hats. The only thing missing is a crippling heroin addiction. Saxton Hale is true blue, rough as guts, and as all Aussie as Russell Coot. You know, I really gotta give a shout out to Valve for their characterization of Saxton Hale. There's so many dumb stereotypes of Australians out there, and it's good to see someone that's done their research and actually done the stereotype correctly. Big shout out to G-Man for that one. But the other thing that bugs me about it is that unfortunately not all of us are Saxton Hales, and there are many other Australian characters and cultures that have basically no representation in video games whatsoever, including the collection of the oldest living cultures in the world, our First Nations people. In fact, one of the few games that does give them recognition is Europa Universalis 4, and it's not exactly the kind of game that's ideal for non-Europeans. However, one studio plans to change that, with Bilby Labs and their project Virtual Songlines, an almost Google Earth-like interactive experience that's providing an authentic representation of the many different First Nations peoples, and how they lived prior to the colonization of Australia by Europeans. And it's important to note that Australia is a very multicultural place, and along with the rich indigenous cultures we have, much of the Australian population are descendants of migrants. You should see our football team. You don't know if you're playing us or a country from the Balkans. And that's my challenge to game developers. I'd like to see more representation of the many different ethnic backgrounds that we have in Australia, like whichever ethnic background my accent comes from, which I'm not going to tell you because it's fun to watch you guys try to guess in the comments. And that about sums it up. While there's a few Aussie video game characters that have made a name for themselves, I reckon that Australia ought to be more than just a fancy backdrop for a map, and there ought to be more than one flavour of Australian character. We're not all the Mick Dundees that Americans think we are. Maybe you learned something, or maybe you had no idea what I was saying half the time. Either way, like this video if you reckon the land down under deserves some more representation in video games. Make sure to comment which Australian city or town GTA 6 should be set in, and hit the sub button if you want some more fair dinkum Aussie content. And as much as I'd love to hang around and have a yarn with yous, my smoko's coming up and I'm gone for a Macca's run. So I suppose I'll see you cheeky buggers later.